The Cardinals named their minor league pitcher and player of the year on Monday in a reminder that the future can still be bright. If you've been following Down on the Farm all year, you weren't surprised by who earned the honors. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer talking some Cardinals baseball with you on Monday, October 14th, 2024. And that's because earlier today, the Cardinals made the announcement of their minor league player and pitcher of the year awards for 2024. And as I mentioned in the tease off the top, if you had followed along with the Down on the Farm segment here on the show throughout the season, the recipients of the awards come as no surprise to you. The pitcher of the year, of course, is Quinn Mathews, and the player of the year goes to Jimmy Crooks, the Double-A catcher who had such a big offensive campaign down there in Springfield. Wow, I mean, these two guys definitely have some bright futures ahead for them. I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about both players and what we could see in store for them for 2025. We'll start with Quinn Mathews, whose story you know by now, but we will reiterate for those who are not as in tune with what's been going on with Mathews. It was a remarkable 2024 season, his first professional campaign after the Cardinals drafted him in the fourth round of the 2023 MLB first-year player draft. They basically said to him the rest of the season, you don't need to pitch anything organized for us. We're going to wait until 2024 to really get that started for you. And the reason for that made sense because of just how many innings he logged as a senior at Stanford. He pitched in the College World Series and in the qualifying rounds for that as he helped guide Stanford to a pretty good season. And his numbers were impressive. The ERA, 3.75, maybe doesn't jump out to you in a way that a lot of times you'll see collegiate stats for guys that are drafted in maybe the first or second round. But when the Cardinals picked him in the fourth round, I immediately thought it was a pretty savvy pick because of what he had displayed only a number of weeks previous to the MLB draft, which was a 156-pitch complete game that he threw for Stanford against Texas last postseason, or I guess the previous postseason we're talking about back in 2023 before that draft. 156 pitches for the complete game from a left-hander who stands at 6'5", right? Just knowing those things about him, you are already intrigued, I would have to imagine. Now seeing the season that he had for the Cardinals in 2024, going from low A, Palm Beach, up to then a promotion to Peoria in high A, then a promotion to Springfield in double A, and making it all the way through 4 levels of the minors in one summer, finishing the year at triple A Memphis as Quinn Mathews just did. And man, was he good. Going from that guy who could throw 156 pitches in a game and say, Coach, I want the ball. I'm not worried about my draft stock tanking because teams are going to be afraid of me throwing this number of pitches. They're going to worry about arm injury, whatever. Like, this guy went out, took the ball for his team. He's a competitor, obviously, to be willing to do what he did in that postseason for Stanford and then get drafted by the Cardinals in the fourth round. Take the rest of the season off from competitive innings because I'll take a look at the innings count from Stanford. But you're talking about a workhorse and a bulldog in Quinn Mathews with what he was able to show that season. It was his fourth year at Stanford, so I believe that would have been either his redshirt junior or his senior season. Had a 3.75 ERA, but 124 and two-thirds innings as a collegiate. I mean, that's a workload when you talk about a college arm getting up to that number. Again, and I'm not trying to make this comparison to shed negative light or anything on Tink Hence, but I want to just bring up Tink Hence because I think workload is going to be an element for him that the Cardinals are going to have to try and figure out if he's going to be a big league starter sooner rather than later. How much and how quickly can they ramp him up on the innings count to be able to get him ready for that workload? Tink Hence in 2023 threw 96 innings, combined between high A Peoria and double A Springfield, 23 starts. This past season dealt with some injuries, had great numbers, 2.71 ERA in Springfield, but only was able to make 20 starts and only threw 79 and two-thirds innings. So for Tink Hence, a question of workload, is he going to be able to withstand and be durable enough to be a big league starter, I think is going to be the question that follows him over the next couple of years as he continues to pursue that goal. I think his stuff is absolutely electric, but it's just a little bit of a different characterization when we think about Quinn Mathews, and the things that we really like about him is the workload and the durability is probably the mark that is most noteworthy and stands out most in his favor, as he threw 120-plus innings in his last collegiate season. And that was in a span from whatever, it is March, maybe February is when they start that season, depending on if they're able to play some games in some warm weather areas, and then going into May and maybe even bleeding into June a little bit. That's a big-time workload. So the Cardinals said take the rest of 2023 off of competitiveness, and they didn't slot him into a rotation anywhere in their organization. They started him from the bottom, essentially, in 2023, having him begin the year in Palm Beach, in low A. And he had a 1.47 ERA in 30 innings. And they said, okay, this dude struck out 52 in 30 innings. He doesn't belong here in low A at 23 years old. Let's bump him up to high A Peoria. He answered the bell there. 2.68 ERA, 43 innings, striking out 58. So still a really robust strikeout rate. So they said, hell, let's bring him up again. They called him up to Double A Springfield, where he spent the bulk of his summer. He spent more innings in Springfield than he did anywhere else throughout this journey. But when you make it through 4 levels, you're not really staying anywhere very long in a given summer. 2.41 ERA, better than the numbers that he posted in Peoria in 52 and a third innings in Springfield, and still the strikeout rate remained. 70 Ks in 52 and a third at Springfield before the Cardinals said in the final month, okay, let's see what you got at AAA Memphis. And that's where he hit a little bit of a snag. In just 4 starts, he had a 6.48 ERA there. Very, very small sample size. 16 and 2/3 innings is all they gave him. Basically got bitten by an elevated walk rate, which is not really something that I would be too concerned about, Cardinals fans, because it's not something that was a factor for him at any of the lower levels of the minor leagues. He actually had really good numbers relative to just the number of strikes he was able to throw. Had a 3.2 walks per 9 rate in low A Palm Beach. It was trimmed down, actually, when he went up to Peoria to 1.9 walks per 9. And then it was still 2.6 walks per 9, which was better than what he saw in low A, not quite as strong as what he did in high A, but basically averaging under 3 walks per 9 through the first 3 levels of the minors. And then he had 16 innings in AAA, walked 14 batters in 16 and 2/3, which was an elevated walk rate for him there, 7.6 walks per 9. The Ks per 9, though, was constant throughout his journey, 15.3 at the lowest level, 12 Ks per 9 at both high A Peoria and Double A Springfield. He had a 12.0 at both levels, and then it was 11.9 Ks per 9 still in those 16 and 2/3 innings that he threw in Memphis. Had 22 strikeouts in the 16 and 2/3. So Quinn Mathews, the journey from, hey, he's an interesting guy because of what he was able to accomplish in college. Interesting makeup to be 6'5", left-hander, then adds some velocity, already known to be durable, and really just developed in an incredible way this past summer. 4 levels of the minors, conquered the first 3, and right now enters the offseason with an opportunity to just get a little stronger, get a little more prepared for what 2025 could throw his way. Just turned 24 on the 4th of October, so about 10 days ago as of this recording. And he's got a real opportunity for a Cardinals team and an organization that has already stated it's going to be looking more at internal options. We expect, although we don't know for sure what that rotation is going to look like, that it's going to consist of not really spending a lot of money, not adding anything new. If they do add anything, it's probably going to be at a cost decrease compared to what they were going to be paying Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson. I think both those guys will end up walking. The Cardinals, I do not expect, as we'll await an official confirmation of that, but I don't expect the Cardinals to bring back either Lynn or Gibby on the $12-ish million options that they both carry for 2025. Those are team options, so the team does have the ability to decline those, and they will have to pay a small buyout to both players, but I think that's the direction that they're going to go. Seems very certain that's going to be the case with Lynn, just based on the way that his season ended and the sentiment surrounding that. With Gibson, it's a little bit different. I guess I would still leave it on the table that they could decide to bring him back as a sort of a shepherd for the rotation, which could consist of some younger players in 2025. But still, that's $11-12 million that you'd be shelling out for a team that is trying to lower payroll. So I'm not sure what that's going to look like. But what that means is guys like Quinn Mathews could absolutely burst onto the scene in 2025 and make their presence known. He went from not to say he was a non-prospect to begin 2024, but he was certainly not on the radar as what I would consider him now, which is the top pitching prospect in the Cardinals organization and arguably the most major league ready. Now, granted, we haven't seen Tink Kent's at AAA. We did see a little bit of a glimpse of what Quinn Mathews would do at that level and had a 6.48 ERA. I think just getting his feet wet in September was a really valuable thing for the Cardinals, because if he starts there in AAA next season, he's already seen it and already has a little bit of an idea for what it looks like. and can sort of go from there and do what we kind of saw Michael McGreevy hopefully have the chance to do down the stretch with the Cardinals this past September, is get a couple of opportunities, get your feet wet a little bit, and maybe go into next season being a little more prepared and ready for what that level could bring. I think McGreevy very well could be in the opening day rotation for the Cardinals, provided he has a decent enough spring that they can justify that move. Pallante is going to be in your rotation. Sonny Gray, will he be traded? That's going to be a big topic, obviously, throughout this offseason. If he's not traded, it'll be Gray at the top of your rotation. It'll be Pallante. It'll probably be McGreevy in there as long as, like I said, he does good enough in spring to justify that decision. And then you kind of look at, okay, is Miles Michaelis traded? Are they eating his money to just make him go away? Do they realize that, since they have to pay him anyway, you might as well retain the option to keep him around? Again, knowing that it could be a situation where you're not that competitive in 2025, you take anything that Miles Michaelis gives you that looks better than what he's been the past couple of years, but your expectations going into that are probably not too high for him to accomplish that. But knowing he's a guy that is a workhorse and is going to be able to take the ball 30 times a year, whether that is 30 times that you're excited to watch is it not necessarily what I'm saying, but it's just a matter of you got innings to fill, and rather than have to call upon a Kloffenstein or a Graceffo or somebody that might not be ready yet, having to rush a Tink Hence or rush a Quinn Mathews and potentially risk their injury or anything of the sort, you say, Michaelis, we're paying him anyway, unless we can get somebody to eat a chunk of that money to have him in their rotation. You could see a world in which the Cardinals retain Michaelis as sort of one of the veteran leaders on a team that might not have very many of those in 2025. And then similar with Steven Matz, he is under contract. Maybe a little bit more of a chance that a team would be willing to bite the bullet on eating some of his money, and the Cardinals would probably eat some as well. But if they could send Matz somewhere, maybe get something back in the way of prospect, get a little bit of salary relief, and open up that spot in the rotation to some younger players for some internal competition. You don't necessarily need to do that. Although I don't know why it is that every time I do this podcast and I talk about the rotation for 2025, the name that I continue to forget is Eric Fetty, and he's one of the guys that should be locked in unless the Cardinals can get a bundle for him in a trade. That 1 year $7 million is, what is it, $7.5 million is pretty solid in terms of just what they're going to owe Eric Fetty for what should be solid middle of the rotation or better production. Again, this is a Cardinals team that, while they're not making payroll decisions to try and maximize 2025, I don't think that there's any reason to think that they're not going to try to go out there and win those games. The people in that clubhouse, the manager, the coaching staff, they're going to try to do everything that they can to win, and it would be nice if they would be allowed to keep Eric Fetty rather than say, hey, we can save $7 million and trade him somewhere and get a prospect and start this rebuild off on the right foot. Yeah, I understand it, but that's a guy that you might actually benefit from those innings if he can throw you 170, 180 innings. You could go Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, Pallante, and McGreevy, and then it could be a Michaelis if you can't trade him. It could be a Steven Matz if you can't trade him in that number 5 spot. But they're at least at the back end of the rotation, especially if you end up trading Sonny Gray. Some questions as to how the Cardinals could look to proceed with some of those final rotation spots, and that could be where a guy like Quinn Mathews, I was getting around to talking about the relevance to Mathews. I think there is opportunity in this 2025 rotation. There's an opportunity for Mathews, if nothing else, to come into spring, make a strong impression. I hope the Cardinals give him a couple of looks in big league spring training games just so they could see what that looks like. Just throw him right into the fire. He'll learn from it if it doesn't go well, and if it does go well, you'll learn that this guy might be closer to readiness for the big leagues than you otherwise would have expected. And he is 24, so that's the thing. He spent a number of seasons at Stanford pitching. And a lot of times, like a guy like Tink Hence, maybe a little bit of a different scenario, given that he was drafted out of high school and you're still trying to build up his arm strength and his durability. That's something that Quinn Mathews had the benefit of doing at the collegiate level, and so he is several years more advanced. The high end of his production, maybe you weren't expecting right away, but it was something that he was immediately able to provide at several of those levels of the minors, to where now you're like, okay, maybe this guy is on the radar. This guy is a legit prospect. So what do you think, Cardinals fans? Quinn Mathews 2025, what do you want to see? What are you hoping to see in terms of the opportunity the Cardinals might give him to actually make a big league debut? I think we do see Quinn Mathews' big league debut in 2025. I don't think it's in the month of April. I think he's got an opportunity to go to spring, to get on the radar, to where if a Matz is in your rotation but then gets injured, or if Michaelis is in your rotation but eventually you just want to put him in the bullpen or DFA him, pay him his money, but not have him participate for you anymore because it gets that bad. I kind of liken Michaelis this coming season to what Patrick Corbin has been for the Nationals for so many years. Big contract, just doesn't work out, but you gotta pitch him because he's going to give you innings, and you just don't feel like you're going to be super competitive anyway. But maybe there's a world in which the Cardinals decide to go a different route. As long as Quinn Mathews bursts onto the scene, has a good spring, and then solid numbers in AAA, I think he could be that first man up to be able to join the rotation at some point. Now, is that lofty for a guy that was just drafted 2023? I mean, not 15, 17 months ago, and was in the fourth round? Perhaps, but man, he has really burst onto the radar. So I'm really interested to see what he's able to do beginning in February. I'm excited to see him down there at spring because it's going to be like his first spring with the big league club. You know he's going to be invited to big league spring training. I don't believe he was there last year. There as part of the minor league part, obviously hadn't even pitched professionally, so that would have been no, he was not there. But I can promise you he's going to get an invite this year. I would be shocked if he doesn't, and I'd be surprised if the Cardinals don't give him a long look at what he's capable of doing down there. This could be a huge spring for Quinn Mathews, as could be the case for Jimmy Crooks. Let's talk about the Double-A catcher who posted a 908 OPS this past season, 371 plate appearances in Double-A Springfield for Crooks, who is 23 years old, had 11 home runs, 62 runs batted in, 321 batting average, a 410 on base, and a 498 slug for a 908 OPS. He had a very good slash line and really did burst onto the radar in terms of what he was able to do offensively, and a solid catcher behind the plate as well. Right now in the organizational pecking order, you've got Wilson Contreras, but of course, is something going to be happening there where he could be traded away and slots could open up? If that's the case, it's pretty easy. I think you go into the season with Ivan Herrera and Pedro Pages as your catching duo, and then Crooks gets bumped up to AAA to begin the season, and he'll start out as the Memphis catcher, if that is the case. If you don't trade, it is going to be interesting. I don't know if this team is going to house three catchers in 2025, if Contreras is your catcher, but then you have Herrera, who's got a big league bat. He doesn't belong in AAA anymore. And if he spends the offseason focusing on just being able to do a little bit more defensively, throwing out base runners is primarily what we're talking about there, Herrera does not belong in AAA ever again. He's a big league bat, but maybe because of the fact that he's a big league bat, the Cardinals decide he could play some first base or he could do some DHing in a brave new world that doesn't maybe have Arenado on the team. Who knows? Goldie's not going to be there, so obviously that's another spot that if he could play some first base, suddenly he's got a way into the lineup on a more frequent basis. They do really like Pedro Pages behind the dish. I do as well. I know a lot of Cardinals fans kind of poo-pooed Pedro throughout the season. They wanted to see more Herrera. I get it. I think Herrera's bat does possess more upside, but I like Pedro Pages as a big leaguer, and I think as a Cardinal for the next several years. So how do you make all of that work? I think it involves at least one catcher playing some first base and both Herrera and Contreras doing some DHing, and maybe you do decide to allocate an additional bench spot for another catcher because they're going to be willing to do different things, and you're going to be willing to use them differently if you're playing them at first base and DH more than we saw this past year. So that's a possibility, but what I'm looking at for Jimmy Crooks is he's probably beginning the year at Memphis regardless. Had a great season in Double-A. This is a guy that's, I think, going to have a big league future, and we're looking to see exactly how soon that could come and what he could potentially do to burst onto the radar. I mean, he's minor league player of the year for a reason. At a 321 batting average in Double-A, he showed some power. As long as the Cardinals, I think it's going to be a big spring training for him as well. You have a billion catchers down there in spring, and so they're going to be looking closely at the way he acquits and handles himself in the role. But I think another good one, and you can never have too many really high-quality catchers throughout your system because eventually those guys have injuries. Those guys are not going to be able to catch 162 games at the big league level when they get there. So you want to make sure that you've got options, and Jimmy Crooks is somebody that I think is definitely flying up the radar for the Cardinals. Turned 23 in July, so is somebody that as a fourth-rounder the previous season, they got 2 fourth-rounders in a row that seem to be doing pretty well. 2022 was Crooks, 2023 Quinn Mathews, and those two are your minor league player and pitcher of the year, respectively, in 2024 for the St. Louis Cardinals. I think people should be very excited about Jimmy Crooks as well, to be able to have that kind of bat from the catcher position. You're obviously anxious to see how it translates to AAA and then eventually to the big leagues. But those are two guys that were definitely impressive this season, and I think we're going to be seeing more and hearing more from both of them in 2025. It was maybe a little bit of a lean year offensively. It's not to say that Crooks won it in a down year, but it was a little bit of a leaner year, I think, in terms of offensive prospects. Double-A didn't really have anybody else stand out other than Crooks quite on that level where I would have thought maybe consideration for that type of organizational award. And at Triple-A, you had guys like Sajasi do really well, but they end up in the big leagues, so that it's not to say that they wouldn't necessarily award it that way, but I think it would probably be against the spirit of the award to have a guy who played a month in the big leagues getting an award that was for minors and for, kind of thinking about the future. So I think that's probably the right call for Jimmy Crooks to be earning that award the way that he did with his performance. I mean, 900 OPS is nothing to sneeze at, and he did that at one of the higher levels of the minor leagues in Double-A. So interested to see kind of how that translates for him. Elsewhere in Triple-A, like, again, Lucan Baker was a guy, and he's an older player, so you're probably not really looking his direction. Koperniak had a nice season in Triple-A. Nick Dunn had good numbers, but he's now been released out of the organization. So, yeah, I think it was an obvious choice to go ahead and give that award to Crooks, and I think it portends well for the way that his future could go. And, of course, that of Quinn Mathews we're very excited to see. To me, Quinn is the number one pitching prospect in the org, surpassing Tink Hence. And I think you'll probably see Quinn Mathews in the top 25 in all of baseball when those lists get updated this offseason. That's going to do it, though, for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys being with me. As Cardinals news drops, we will continue to post throughout the offseason. And I think once you get the World Series concluded, it's going to be more of a consistent basis that we're at least having either news or speculation to talk about when it comes to the St. Louis Cardinals. So make sure you guys keep it locked here on the channel. Make sure you check out the other content that we'll be posting to the channel as well. Mizzou football content from the Big Show. New Blues podcast by Clay Harrell has dropped a couple of episodes now. The Blues Breakdown podcast. You've probably seen that gracing your screen. So appreciate you guys for checking out all the St. Louis, Missouri-based sports content that we will continue to produce here on the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals Writer channel. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.